They've touched our hearts, they've made us smile, and became dear friends who we will always remain hopelessly devoted to.
For 50 years, John Travolta was the comeback king, the icon who survived every slump with a smile. But that smile concealed a secret war against the organization that claims to own his soul. The world knows his son, Jett, who died tragically in 2009. But the real story wasn't just an accident. It is about a father allegedly forced to choose between his religion's strict doctrine and his son's survival. Now, the prisoner of faith is breaking cover. He is selling his homes and stepping back. Is he finally leaving? The answer is complicated, because for John Travolta, the church wasn't just a belief system. It was the safety net that caught him when he was young, a net that slowly and quietly turned into a web. The miracle cure that became a cage. Before he was a global icon, John Travolta was just a high school dropout from Englewood, New Jersey, searching for a cure for his own fragility. He was a sensitive kid, raised in a performing family, but he carried a vulnerability that the cutthroat world of show business threatened to crush. He didn't just want to be famous, he wanted to be fixed. He was plagued by anxiety, hypochondria, and a desperate need for order in a chaotic world. Then, in 1975, on the set of a B-movie horror flick called The Devil's Reign, he found his solution. The location was Durango, Mexico, a place of scorching heat and isolation. A 21-year-old Travolta was suffering from a severe flu and exhaustion, struggling to get through the shoot. It was then that actress Joan Prather handed him a book titled Dianetics and offered him a Scientology assist, a spiritual healing technique. Travolta later claimed that after just 30 minutes of this auditing, his flu symptoms vanished entirely. For a young actor desperate for control, this wasn't just a book, it was a superpower. It was the technology he had been waiting for. He believed it gave him an edge, a way to hack his own mind and delete his fears. This miracle gave him the confidence to land his breakout role in Welcome Back, Kotter. When he exploded into superstardom with Saturday Night Fever and Grease, he didn't credit his talent, he credited the church. He told the world that Scientology was the ladder he climbed to the stars. But this salvation came with a price. By accepting the church's help, he unknowingly planted a looming shadow over his future. He wasn't just joining a religion, he was entering a high control group that famously rejects modern psychiatry and views neurological disorders not as medical conditions, but as psychosomatic issues to be treated with spiritual auditing. As his fame grew, so did his value to the organization. He became their golden boy, the most famous face of their success. The church treated him like royalty. They surrounded him with assistants, managed his life, and catered to his every whim. They built a wall of safety around him that felt like protection, but was actually containment. This status gave him immense power in Hollywood, but it also trapped him. Being the face of the organization meant he had to be a perfect example of its technology. He couldn't have problems that auditing couldn't fix. He couldn't show weakness. Then, in 1992, the ticking time bomb of his life was set with the birth of his son, Jett. Jett's life under the doctrine began from his very first breath. John and his wife, Kelly Preston, who was even more devout than John, practiced what Scientologists call a silent birth. According to the writings of L. Ron Hubbard, words spoken during labor can cause aberrations and psychological trauma in the infant's reactive mind. So, Jett entered the world in total, enforced silence. It was a chilling precursor to the rest of his life. From day one, Jett's reality was filtered through a lens that denied the existence of the very medical conditions he would soon develop. The golden trap was shut tight. John Travolta was now a father, but his ability to parent was subject to the approval of a doctrine that claimed to know more about his son's mind than any doctor ever could. The seizure that exposed the truth. By the late 90s, John Travolta was living a double life. On screen, he was the cool, collected gangster of Pulp Fiction, but at home, he was a father living in a private war. As Jett grew, it became apparent to everyone around him that he was suffering from significant developmental issues. He was nonverbal for a long time. He had trouble with motor skills. In a standard medical context, this would likely be diagnosed as autism, but for a high-ranking Scientologist, such a label was reportedly forbidden. The church's doctrine allegedly views psychology and psychiatry as pseudosciences and industries of death. To admit his son had a neurological condition, like autism, would be to admit that the technology had failed. It would be a public embarrassment to the organization he represented. So, John Travolta, the loving father, was forced into a corner. He publicly navigated this by citing a different, rare condition. In a 2001 interview with Larry King, he explained that Jett suffered from Kawasaki syndrome, an illness causing inflammation of the blood vessels. He specifically blamed the condition on environmental toxins, stating, "I was obsessive about cleaning. So, we constantly had the carpets cleaned, implying the chemical fumes caused Jett's issues." This explanation perfectly aligned with the church's teachings on purification and toxins, conveniently avoiding the psychiatric label of autism. But the reality was far more dangerous than carpet fumes. Jett was suffering from serious grand mal seizures. These weren't mild episodes. They occurred every 5 to 10 days. They were violent and life-threatening. This is the core reveal, the heartbreaking secret at the center of the tragedy. Reports suggest that for years, the family allegedly tried to treat these seizures with the church's preferred methods: vitamins, nerve assists, and spiritual auditing. They were reportedly hesitant to use the standard, heavy pharmaceutical interventions recommended by neurologists, as these drugs affect the mind, a big taboo in their faith. John was walking a tightrope over a canyon. He loved Jett fiercely. He took him everywhere. But the looming shadow of his faith meant he had to hide the true nature of Jett's struggles from the world. He was protecting the church's image, unaware that this secrecy was setting the stage for a catastrophe that would shatter his world. The explosion happened on New Year's weekend in 2009. The family flew to their vacation home at the Old Bahama Bay Hotel. It was meant to be a celebration. Instead, it became the site of a horror that would expose everything they had tried to hide. On the morning of January 2nd, Jett suffered a massive seizure in the bathroom. The details are heartbreaking. He fell, hitting his head on the bathtub. He was found not by a nurse, but by his nannies, Jeff Catherine, and a man known as Eli, both fellow Scientologists. This is where the hidden crisis became a public panic. As Travolta desperately performed CPR, a local paramedic named Torino Lightborn arrived. In the chaos, a critical document was produced, a refusal of transport form. In a panic, Travolta signed it. Why? Why would a father refuse to transport his dying son? Reports suggest he was desperate to fly Jett to Florida for treatment rather than trust the local Bahamian hospital, a 45-minute ambulance drive away. He seemingly believed he could control the situation better by getting Jett to a U.S. facility, perhaps one more aligned with his views, or perhaps he just wanted to get him home. But the decision was futile. The seizure was catastrophic. Jett was pronounced dead at the hospital. He was only 16. The immediate aftermath was a wave of global sympathy. But as the shock subsided, a darker narrative began to emerge, centered on a blackmail plot that would force John to do the one thing he had avoided for 16 years: tell the truth. In the weeks following the death, the ambulance driver, Torino Lightborn, and a former Bahamian senator attempted to extort $25 million from Travolta. They claimed to possess the refusal of transport document. They threatened to release it to the international press, implying it would show Travolta was negligent, that he was more concerned with escaping to Florida than saving his son. To fight them, John had to make a choice. He could pay the money and keep his secrets, or he could take the stand and expose everything. He chose to fight, but the cost was total. In a Bahamian courtroom, under oath, with the world watching, John Travolta finally said the words he had suppressed for a decade. He testified, "My son was autistic and suffered from seizure disorder." The admission was a bombshell. The Kawasaki cover story was gone. The toxins theory was gone. The truth was on the record. But the revelation got even more shocking. It was revealed during the trial that Jett had been taking a strong anti-seizure medication called Depakote, but he had been taken off the drug prior to the trip. The family's lawyers stated the drug had lost its effectiveness and they were concerned about side effects. But for critics, this was the smoking gun. Had the doctrine influenced the decision to stop the medication? Had the pressure to be drug-free led to a fatal vulnerability? The extortion trial, meant to vindicate John, had instead placed his entire belief system on trial. He had won the battle against the extortionists. The case ended in a mistrial, and the charges were dropped, but he had lost the war for his privacy. The world now knew that he had been forced to choose between his religion's dogma and his son's reality, and the result was a tragedy he would have to carry forever. The silent defection of a survivor. The fallout of the trial wasn't just public judgment. It was a private shattering of faith. John Travolta had spent 30 years believing that the church had the answers to everything. But when it mattered most, when his son was dying on a bathroom floor, the tech couldn't save him. The vitamins didn't work. The auditing didn't stop the seizure. For a while, he clung to the organization even tighter. This is a common psychological response to trauma. Doubling down. He publicly credited the church with helping him survive the grief. He said they saved his life. But reports emerged that this support came with a terrifying level of surveillance. In a disturbing interview, Travolta revealed that Scientology minders were with him 24 hours a day for 2 solid years after Jett's death. They traveled with him, they stayed in his home, they were never more than a few feet away. While he framed this as spiritual assistance, critics viewed it as containment. The church knew John was a flight risk. He was grieving, he was vulnerable, and he had just admitted in court that their stance on autism was wrong. They couldn't afford to let their golden boy crack. They had to make sure he didn't turn his grief into anger. For a decade, it seemed to work. John stayed loyal. He starred in movies. He smiled on red carpets. And he kept the secrets. But the looming shadow wasn't done with him yet. In 2020, tragedy struck again. His wife, Kelly Preston, the fierce defender of the faith who had stood by him through everything, passed away after a secret, 2-year battle with breast cancer. Once again, the Travoltas had faced a medical crisis in total silence. But this time, the aftermath felt different. Kelly was the anchor. She was the militant believer. With her gone, the chains that bound John to the organization seemed to loosen. This is where the story shifts from a tragedy to a thriller. Following Kelly's death, observers noticed a quiet, methodical unwinding of John Travolta's life. He sold the family's longtime retreat in Islesboro, Maine. But the massive signal came in 2021, when he listed and sold his waterfront home in Clearwater, Florida, for $4 million. This wasn't just a real estate transaction. That home was located just a mile from the Flag Land Base, the Church of Scientology's spiritual headquarters. It was his embassy. It was the physical symbol of his commitment to the inner circle. Selling it was a message. Rumors of a quiet exodus began to swirl. Reports surfaced suggesting that after losing both his son and his wife, John was done. He had seen too much death. He had realized that for all the promises of superpowers and clearing the mind, the church couldn't stop cancer, and it couldn't cure autism. But he didn't hold a press conference. He didn't write a tell-all book like Leah Remini. He went silent. He stopped posting about church events. He ceased his public recruitment efforts. He began posting more about his daughter, Ella, and his young son, Ben. He started sharing nostalgic posts about his old non-Scientologist friends like Olivia Newton-John and Bruce Willis. The final detail exposes the genius of his strategy. John Travolta knows better than anyone what happens to people who leave loudly. He saw what happened to Nicole Kidman. He knows the policy of disconnection, that if he is declared a suppressive person, his remaining friends inside the church, and potentially even his children if they chose to stay, would be forced to cut all contact with him. So, he is allegedly pulling a slow fade. He is engaging in a secret defection. He is packing his bags in plain sight, but moving so quietly that the church cannot attack him without looking like monsters. He is a man trying to walk out of a prison without tripping the alarm. He is no longer the golden boy. He is a survivor, a widower, and a father who is trying to protect what little family he has left from the organization that consumed the first half of his life. The heavy price of blind faith. So, how do we remember John Travolta? We've seen his rise from a vulnerable kid to a Hollywood legend, powered by a controversial faith that gave him confidence but demanded his soul. we've uncovered the heartbreaking loss of his son, a tragedy fueled by a need for secrecy and a clash between doctrine and medicine. And we've seen the chilling reality of his life under surveillance, a grieving father managed by handlers. But his legacy is shifting. He is no longer just the dancing icon or the Scientology poster boy. He is a man attempting the hardest act of his life, breaking free. His story is a devastating cautionary tale about the cost of handing your agency over to a system. He gave them his loyalty, his money, and his reputation. In return, he got grief. But what do you think? Is John Travolta still a believer protecting his privacy? Or is he a father who has finally realized the price was too high and is plotting his escape? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We have a new video, just like this one, coming next week. If you love digging deeper than the headlines, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss another video. If you love this story, we've got more celebrity deep dives queued up for you. Just click the videos on your screen to continue. Thanks for watching.